Welcome to Postpartum Unfiltered.
The podcast where we get real about what happens during the postpartum period.
I am Jillian,
And I'm Sarah.
and we are two doctor moms who are not prepared for what postpartum would bring.
By sharing your stories, we hope to spread awareness and allow other families to be more prepared for the time after birth.
Hi, Sarah.
Hey, Jill. What's been going on since the last time we talked?
Uh, I've been sick, so I'm just surviving. I'm surviving on surviving. My husband gives me a hard time because he tells me, "You're always sick for so long." I said, "Am I? Am
How
I
can
when
you
I'm
use my
taking care of these
immunity?
children and
Yeah.
cleaning the house and doing all these things? What do you do when you're sick?"
Well,
I
now
sleep, and then I feel better. I'm like, "Is that right?"
well, now they all started school, right? So like now I'm like just waiting until, my son gets the little one sick. We dropped him off his first day of school and we're like waiting in line. We're like, yes, we're like the first ones in line.
Uh-huh.
So the thing is our school is in our neighborhood. So it's
Awesome.
literally like a 30-second drive. So he looks at me and goes,
Perfect.
I have to go potty. And I'm like, no, you don't. He goes, yes, I do. I need to go right now. I'm like, right now, when we're like number one in line on the first day, take him
Mhm.
all the way back home. He uses the bathroom. Mind you, we used the bathroom before we left. And we get there and the line is like all the way around the neighborhood.
Oh no.
And now I'm late for my first patient. And it
Oh
is just
no.
full, yeah, I'm behind for the whole
The
day.
whole thing. It's the
Well,
whole thing.
I think it's like an excuse to not go in.
Yeah, of course. Totally. It totally is. All right, let's jump into it. So today we have a very special guest. Sarah Broberg is the founder of How It Feels to Be a Mother. It's another podcast and a movement rooted in the recognition that motherhood is more emotionally complex than we're led to believe it should feel, and that we must create non-judgmental spaces for mothers to share their authentic feelings as whole human beings, which I absolutely love. Love her podcast. She's a mother and an award-winning public relations, marketing, and crisis communication strategist with over 20 years of C-suite experience in the Middle East and North Africa, Europe, and the United States. Sarah, welcome. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. The work that you're doing is so important, and I feel like there's such synergy between our two podcasts. So I'm super excited. It's also a little uncomfortable for me, I'm going to be honest, because normally like I'm like talking to people and asking them the questions and hearing
Yes.
stories. So I'm a PR person. I'm behind the scenes. So this is flipping the script for me.
Yeah, I love it.
That's awesome. Sarah, is there anything about like your birth or pregnancy that you'd like to discuss today in relation to your postpartum experience?
Yeah, I feel like I have probably maybe had a bit of a unique experience. With both of my children were born in Cairo, Egypt.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
so yeah, and this was also like a million years ago, which is also maybe different. I think a lot of the moms on your podcast so far have been fairly recently postpartum, but my kids are 15 and 17. So it's been a while since I've been there. So I've been like digging, trying to remember all of the everything attached to it.
Yes.
Right.
So much. And so yeah, I'm again, so deeply admire the work that you all are doing, because there's how it feels to be a mother. We talk about like how we don't talk about all of the emotions
Yeah.
related to how it feels to be a mother. And
Yes.
we are absolutely not talking about all of the complex emotions and feelings around how it feels to become a mother, which is
Right.
that postpartum experience. And so there's such a diversity of emotions around both of my both of my pregnancies and the birth and in the postpartum, which I think because my children were born, they're about 22, 23 months apart.
Mm.
So it was a relatively kind of quick turnaround too, and some, unusual circumstances. But being being pregnant in a foreign country, where I didn't really speak the language, I didn't really have a strong support network. I certainly didn't have a community where I felt that, I could go to get the support that I needed, or to ask the questions about what the heck am I what the heck am I in for,
Right.
or like what am I actually feeling right now, like is this normal, is this not, and so that was also one of the reasons I really felt pretty passionately about how it feels to be a mother, because I wanted to create that community for people who, wherever they are, who may not have had that for themselves. And so for like I said, I have two children. They were born in 2006 and 2008, respectively. I was in Cairo at the time. I was working full time. Very demanding career in public relations. And I wasn't 100% sure I even wanted to be a mom. It's not anything that really like tugged at my heartstrings. I kind of guess I always just assumed that I would be a mom, but it was like I never felt that calling, right? I mean, I kind of always say
Yeah.
like I'm not the type of person who readily identifies as a mother. Like if you were to say like what are like top 10 characteristics to describe yourself, I don't think mother would be like in my top 10.
Yeah.
So
No, I mean,
I'm
yeah.
like still working to unpack all
Yeah.
that.
I'm getting through it.
You
I'm
can see
processing.
like some women are like really really about being a mom, and before I
Mhm.
had kids I was like I don't think I'm going to be a good mom because that person's been ready since they were like born themselves. Like I never like had baby dolls. I never was like giving them like I never felt that like maternal instinct. So I get that.
Yeah. It's also so interesting. I'm so interesting to hear like some of your postpartum experience. One with children that are a little bit older than the mothers that, like you said, we talked to more freshly postpartum women on this podcast primarily, and just it's in a totally different system. You know, I have no idea what it's like to give birth in Egypt or what kind of structure they have or what the culture even is there for new moms.
But even
Yeah.
translation, right, between languages, like sometimes you can't express yourself completely. So I feel like even if they were trying to tell you something, there was translation or vice versa, probably a lot of that emotional component is kind of lost. There's like, because, when you speak different languages, it's hard to express certain things in another language. I
Yes.
feel like that's also probably part of, I would think.
For sure, to all of that. Yeah. So I do want to preface this by saying like my experience of giving birth and raising my children in Egypt is not indicative of everyone's experience of giving
Right,
Yeah.
of
birth and
course.
raising
Right,
kids in
right.
Egypt, right? So this is very, very, very much my own unique story. But yeah, so I wasn't 100% sure I wanted to have kids, but my husband, we were high school sweethearts. We went to high school in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, as our hometown. Um, and found ourselves in Cairo many years later. And when I told him, I'm not really sure, like I want to have kids. We've been together for such a long time, and he like flipped the fuck out, like
Yeah.
started weeping.
Oh
Was like,
no.
oh my God, like how are
Oh
we not
no.
have this conversation? I was like, oh, hey, like not that big of a deal. Sure, we can have kids. Like
Uh,
okay, like
yeah.
okay.
I'm on
Um,
board now. Yeah.
I
yeah.
didn't know it was that important till right now.
Yeah, exactly. Like, okay, you feel that strongly. I don't. We can do this. Um,
Hmm.
as we do, we're just like, oh yeah, sure. Like this is important to you, my own needs. Like, I don't need to
Yeah.
unpack all of that,
Yeah.
right? So yeah, so I was actually on Depo-Provera, which is the shot, the birth
Hmm.
shot for many, many, many years. So it took us a while once I got off of that to get pregnant. Interesting thing about Egypt is that because of the nature of society, that oftentimes people in new marriages, like if you're not pregnant kind of right away, like there's a lot of questions asked about like what's going on. So there are a lot of fertility drugs. And like a lot of them are just available, like kind of readily available. Or if your doctor's like, oh, you're not pregnant yet, here, have some fertility drugs. So there's a lot of pressure to conceive pretty early on. At least there was at the time. Again, I can only speak to my experience um, back in the time that I was there. And so we were also older. I mean, I had my kids when I was 29 and 31 respectively, which is old in Egyptian culture. And a
Hmm.
lot of cultures, frankly, that's old on the older side.
Yeah.
And so, we ended up getting pregnant. Both of my pregnancies were easy peasy. I mean, I was still working full time, very active job, running multi-day conferences, and my little suit and just with a basketball like hanging out in front of me. So it was like no biggie. I'm working right
Yeah.
up until I was in the hospital to have these kids. And they were both, even though the pregnancies were great, there were complications with both. So my first was breech. We knew he was breech. We tried all sorts of things to kind of turn him around and
Hmm.
crazy yoga things, and nothing
Right.
worked. We're just like, okay, he's just breech. This is what we're gonna do. We know it's gonna have to be a C-section. So we're just gonna that's how this is gonna have to be. So I had an epidural for both of my pregnancies as well. The first one was fine. Jillian, you mentioned in one of yours about the shakes. I
Oh
also
yeah.
had the shakes
Terrible.
after
Nobody talked to me
my
about it. I was like, I'm
labor.
having a seizure. This is the end.
Yeah, me
Goodbye.
too. Me too. They're like, "Are you okay?" I'm like, "Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm just
I was
really
like,
emotional."
yeah,
They're
I was
like,
like,
"No, you're like literally like convulsing."
yeah.
I'm like, "Okay, whatever."
I was like,
Um,
it's eclampsia. The next step
yeah.
is death.
So yeah, so my first pregnancy and everything and the birth went really smoothly. And he didn't want to nurse like at all. Like, I didn't have a lactation consultant. I didn't know anything about these things, all of the kind of I think that maybe I would have had more knowledge and more access had I been in a different country, but those things were just not available to me or were not made available. Something interesting that I didn't know until it came time to nurse is that one of my nipples was inverted, um,
Oh,
and the doctor was like, "Why didn't you tell me?" And I was like, "Dude, like." I'm not just gonna be like, by the way, like I didn't know that there was something wrong with it. Like, how would I
yeah.
know? That's not
This is how it's been my
I
whole life.
I
this.
have yeah, I had a friend who said she was at, she was doing like her regular gynecological exam before she ever had kids. And the doctor was like, that side's going to be good. That nipple's wonky. You're going to have trouble on that side.
Nice.
She was like, what?
Is it?
Yeah. Like, yeah. That's not
It's
going to
like
be okay.
so funny. Yeah. And like I think that one actually turned out to be like the better one. Would you call it like the super producer or
Yeah,
something?
Mhm.
Yeah.
that's me.
Yeah.
Yeah. I got
Yeah.
one working overtime.
Yeah. Doing
Mine just
the
stayed
little one.
unemployed. So
Yeah, she's in line. The cup, please, sir.
But it was also one of those things where, I've heard so many stories about like feeling judged and blamed for your body doing the things that it does. And that was
Yeah,
one of the where I was like, what the fuck, dude? Like I
right.
gave birth. I'm like trying to like nurse my kid. I'm like, I'm not really sure like what's happening here, why he doesn't, and it was just like extra stress on top of like, judgment and like
Right.
that all of that shit that goes along with it that I like did not need to take on.
Yeah.
So eventually I ended up I had a home pump. I actually had to go purchase one, like a hand pump. So
Yeah.
I had like the strongest right forearm known to man for like several years.
You're like going to people on the street.
she's like,
Dude, try my
somebody
grip
jar
string.
open.
Test it. Test
Call her.
it.
Call her. Open the jar.
Yeah. So side perk.
Exactly. Yeah. It's just like
One
super fun.
Popeye, one Popeye forearm.
Well, yeah, Popeye. Oh my God.
I should have got that tattoo, that anchor or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Were you in the Navy? No, I had a handheld breast pump. So
And I nursed
kind of a
both of
big
my
deal.
kids for well over a year for both of them.
Wow.
So that, and he took to the bottle really, really quickly. That was a nice value add, I guess, because his dad was able to help feed him regularly. And it was nice. But you all know it's like such a blur. Those first few weeks, like you're just in zombie mode. It's just
Yeah.
like wake up, feed, sleep, maybe if you're lucky, like
Yeah.
clean something, and then just like
Right.
rinse and repeat. I remember there was one time I was like so exhausted and so like delirious, and he wouldn't stop crying that my mother-in-law had come to visit for a couple of weeks. She lives in the States, and I literally got up out of my bed and I picked my kid up out of his crib and I walked into the living room and I just gave him to her. And I was like,
Mhm.
and I didn't say a word. And she just was like, I'm just like here. And I just like walked away and went and got
Yeah.
some sleep. Just like,
Yeah.
I cannot. Somebody else has to do this for me right now in this moment because I don't, I don't have the bandwidth to do anything other than just hand him over.
Yeah.
Well, that's actually really good of you, though, that you recognize that and you were like, I need to separate from this. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember after my first one, it was like, I don't know, our first or second visit to the pediatrician, and they said, it's okay to walk away from a crying baby that has had all of its needs met.
Yeah.
If the diaper's not dirty, if he just ate, if he's been burped and he's still crying, it's okay for you to take a break and walk away. And I remember thinking like, well, that sounds crazy. And I also felt like, yeah, I mean, like, there's only so much you can do, right? I felt like I was still like not connected in that moment. So I was like, yeah, dude, duh. And and now I'm like, yeah, it's hard to put them down. and walk away when you feel like you're supposed to know what's wrong with them. Like I feel like, especially as the mother, it's like people be like, oh, that cry means he's hungry. That cry means he's tired. That cry means he pooped. And I'm like, all these cries sound the same to me. And people were like even my own kids, I'm like, I don't know. Even my husband sometimes would be like, oh, that means he's hungry. And I'd be like it would make me feel terrible because I'm like, well, what kind of mother am I? I can't tell the difference in the way that he sounds, you
Mm.
know? And that's how with the crying thing, I'm always just like, don't even talk to me. Like, I'm just going to let him go because I don't know what's going on with these cries.
We're really
Yeah, it
hard
was
on
just like
ourselves.
more like deductive reasoning. I'm like, okay,
Yeah,
did like
that's,
check the boxes, right?
yeah,
Because
that's how I
like
was.
I also didn't feel like a super like close connection.
Hmm.
The fairy tale, like hearts and rainbows and
Yeah.
roses and all of that. I didn't
Uh-huh.
feel any of that. His
Yeah.
dad was like immediately smitten, right? But I was just like, no. And because he wasn't latching, and that was like a little bit frustrating. And I just felt like, you feel all the things that you feel about yourself too. Like, I'm a failure. I'm not doing this right. There's something wrong with
Right.
me. Certainly not blaming the child, but just felt like, oh my God, like all of the, just so all the complexity of emotions as it
Right.
relates to postpartum.
Yeah.
And so, it was, I did have some help. My husband at the time was doing more of like nonprofit work. So he was pretty readily available to help care for the child, which was great. In Egypt, they do have, at the time, they had a 3-month maternity leave, which is very generous.
Mhm.
And still not nearly enough. Just
Mhm.
advocate for
Oh
that. I'll
yeah.
just say that.
Yeah.
But it was far better than I would have likely had in the States. So that was a bonus. I was also working at a job. They were very like kid friendly. And even but my husband, or my former husband, we are not together anymore. And that's a very good thing for all parties involved.
I heard a comedian say one time, no good marriage ends in divorce. So, like, don't be sad about it.
Yeah.
Happy marriages are not getting divorced. So, no big deal.
That's solid.
Yeah.
Yeah, but he sort of seemed to think that I was like, had some type of a postpartum depression. I didn't feel like I was depressed. I didn't feel like I just felt like I was just overwhelmed, and there was a lot going on, and a lot of the responsibility fell to me. And
Yeah.
that and feeling very lonely.
Yeah.
Um, I didn't
Loneliness
have
is
a
the key.
community. My family was not around. I wasn't really very connected with my mother, and who was living in Alaska at the time. So I felt very lonely. I've actually felt very lonely most of my life.
Mhm.
Actually, so we're unpacking that in therapy too.
Sure, sure, sure. That's
Yeah,
another episode.
as you do, as you
Yeah,
do. Yeah.
yeah.
And so when I actually got a call out of the blue for another job opportunity, I was in like 2 months at my maternity leave at that point. And it was a good offer, and I was interested. And I talked to, my husband at the time, and he was like, if this is what you want to do, then go for it. Like, I want to support you. And, if this is going to help you, like, find yourself, or do whatever you need to do to kind of you figure this out, or emerge from this, whatever he was characterizing it, then go for it. So I switched jobs. I made a big career change. I started right after the 3-month mark of my maternity leave with a whole new career, which is very, very demanding, and all of
Mhm.
the things. It was a great move. I'm still working in public relations and marketing, and communications now, but they always say, like, those kind of big 5 things in your life that are just like really like shatter the foundation. It's like a death, like a marriage, moving house, getting a job, or like having a bit, whatever those things are. I'm like, oh,
Mhm.
I'm just gonna
Just
bundle this
all those
so
back
that
to back. Yeah.
we could just like navigate it all at one time. And then pretty quickly, almost immediately after I stopped nursing, I got pregnant again.
Yeah.
So there is something to the birth control thing.
Yeah.
Say that it's like nursing is some good birth control. Um, yeah, it's or pumping, I guess, is probably more accurate in my case.
Mhm.
So I got pregnant right again, another pretty easy birth, or excuse me, pregnancy, but the birth was complicated. The placenta detached. I was trying to have a natural birth, and I was in labor for quite a while. I had an epidural, and the placenta detached. I can't remember the proper term.
Abruption.
Yes. And I was immediately rushed into surgery. I didn't even know what was happening at the time because no one was telling me what was happening. I just
Oh,
back and like there was blood all over the bed, and I was like,
Oh
"What
my
the
God.
fuck is happening?"
yeah.
Yeah,
That
for
doesn't feel
sure.
normal.
Yeah,
Am I gonna
yeah,
be
exactly.
okay?
Like, hold on, that looks like a lot.
Is
What?
this, hey, did you put me in an active crime scene in this room
Right.
or no?
Uh,
Outline of the body. Yeah.
Yeah.
And like, and my husband at the time was like, he was like coming in from like outside somewhere. So he was like, when they sees me rushing by the elevator, like going to like the operating room, like what the hell's happening? And I'm like,
Yikes.
I don't
Yeah.
know, like what's happening. Like, so they wheel me into the OR, and the doctor is just like, okay, we're just gonna like, you're just gonna go to sleep for a little bit. Boom. I had
Mm.
nobody told me anything about what was happening, that I was having
Wow.
surgery, that there was anything going on. I almost needed a blood transfusion.
Yikes.
Thank God I didn't. But that was a brutal surgery because they had to get the child out very quickly.
Yeah.
And so they used my same C-section scar, which was great. But they also tore into a lot of the muscle that was
La,
still
la, 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 la,
kind of
la.
like,
Yeah.
expanded
Separated.
the
Yeah.
smile even more. So that was pretty brutal. Also, I had I heard one or two, or maybe you both had the situation where your epidural didn't work.
yeah,
Yeah.
mine, yeah.
And the same for me too. What in my case they called it a window in your epidural, which is like I had only a part of it was working everywhere except one spot on my body,
Oh,
which was that horrible, like rugged, like incision.
The one place you want it to work.
Of course, the one place. And I kept saying, like, I'm in a lot of pain. I mean, I'm doped up, right? And they're like, we
yeah.
can't give you more. Like, we
Yeah.
Oh,
the
yeah.
maximum. And the whole, like, when I finally came to, like, the next day or whatever, like, my whole left side of my body was completely numb. Like, I couldn't
Yikes.
move it. I could not move. That because I guess all of the drugs had obviously got
Yeah.
side of the body. Um, and I didn't want to see my child.
Yeah.
I was like, I feel like shit. This was horrible. I'm
Mm.
terrified.
Yeah.
What the fuck just happened? And
Right.
I have to care for like a human. They're like, do you want to see him? I'm like, I can't even hold him. Like my body
Yeah.
doesn't
That's a,
even work. Like,
yeah.
You need to register everything that happened to you.
You're
yeah,
right.
yeah.
Oh, you didn't
So
even know that you were going to
it was
surgery. It's
rough.
crazy.
And my mom was there. My mom came from the States this time. They're tag teaming it. And so it was nice to have her there, to kind of just work through that stuff. And my husband was also in the room with me, and my husband at the time. So that was nice. And eventually I came around, and and everything was great. It was different. He latched right away. He took to nursing immediately.
Oh,
So that
nice.
was a pretty validating experience. So I think that helped with our bonding and kind
Yeah.
of overcome that rocky start.
Yeah.
But then you have to go home, right? And now I have, as you know, like a toddler to take care of, and I have like this new baby, and I'm really recovering, which from a very painful delivery. So then like within 4 weeks or something, my mother-in-law, who was in the States, had an accident, and she ended up needing to have like a hip replacement or a back surgery. She's had many surgeries. So we decided we were going to come and stay in Egypt, or excuse me, come move from Egypt to stay in the United States for a couple of months while I finished out my maternity leave. And that was a really lovely time, to be able to spend time together as a family and just really relax and bond with together as a family, for her to see her grandbabies, like, and get to hold the little one just like in her lap. It was so sweet the way that they were bonding together. And then we came back to the States, and then she had a series of falls. And then my husband went to stay with her. So at this point, I am by myself in Egypt. I have a toddler, I have a newborn, I'm working a full-time job. I don't really have much of a community around me. And now my husband is gone, to care for his ailing mother. So that was a very that was a really hard time in my life.
Of
He was
course.
gone for about 9 months, maybe more.
Wow.
Um, and this was before like Zoom and stuff like that,
Right.
so
Right.
we would talk like on the like through like voice over IP or whatever,
Mhm.
so fancy at the time.
Yeah.
But like it just wasn't the same. And I was so, even though I knew that he had to go care for her, right? It was the only real option, but I was so resentful and I felt like shit for
Yeah.
feeling so resentful.
Yeah.
And, that triggered like my deeply rooted childhood, like fear of abandonment,
Yeah.
that stuff. And then trying to like, trying to raise two kids and like,
Yeah.
yeah, it was so, so, so much. And he came back home and it was so weird. He walked in the door and I'd only heard his voice for like voice over IP for like 9 months or however long. And like he walked in and it was like all like surround sound stereo. Like his normal voice was like boom, boom, boom. I was like,
Yeah.
this is wild. I will say I was 100% depressed during those months.
Mhm.
I kind of like, for knowing myself, I like kind of like when I get like mini depressed, I'm like, I'm just gonna snack on all the food and all the chocolate and all the goldfish.
Mhm.
And then if I'm like really depressed, like I just don't eat anything. So I got like really unhealthy. And it took some time to get back to being healthy. My kids were cared for, but I was not caring for myself.
Yeah.
Um, and we were also not caring for our relationship. So we never took the time that we needed to, that we should have to really connect as a couple.
Yeah.
After being gone for so long, I didn't want to leave my kids. I didn't trust anyone to care for them the way that I would care for them. I think I probably also had maybe some type of a slightly unhealthy attachment to them because they were the only thing that I had for so long.
Yeah.
Um, at least like that closely. And yeah, and our relationship just never recovered. It never recovered. I think in a lot of ways that was probably the beginning of the end. Um,
Yeah, I
and
think it's really hard. And I think it's something that's really something we don't talk about. We talk about, well, number one, I don't think in general a lot of people talk about enough stuff before they get married. And then
Right.
when the things come up, then it's like, oh no, that's the deal breaker or whatever. But we really don't talk about what it takes to raise children and how much time, energy, and focus that is going to take, especially from the mother, and then how that's going to impact your relationship. Because like, my husband and I joke because he'll get in my face like at the end of the day, and I'm like, please just get out of my face. And he's like, oh, you used to love it when I would do this, right? Yeah. Well, I just had two kids all over me all day, like, and I've been at work all day, and like, Sarah and I treat patients, so they always need something, and like everybody always needs something. So could you just chill out? And then it's like, well, like, we can't just neglect this relationship.
Right. Well, I heard there's something
And
like a roommate phase. Like people don't talk
yeah,
enough about a roommate phase that happens when you have kids because your energy is on work and then your kids and you're like now I have to also give to this relationship. I have to also work out. I have to also make sure I eat healthy. Like it can get so overwhelming.
yeah,
yeah,
And we think sometimes, oh, is it just us? Like, is it just our relationship? And that's why these podcasts are great because you can actually hear, oh no, it's pretty common and like can help you navigate through those things.
yeah.
So the roommate phase is real.
Oh, it is. And, I mean, that's one of the things in my current relationship is, it's easier when my kids are older, right? And they're like,
yeah.
get away from me. I don't want
Right,
anything to
yeah.
do. Which it's amazing.
Yeah,
Just
I do. I
actually,
tell I ask my patients with older kids, like, are they gonna stop talking to me for just like a little while? Just a little while. And they're like, yeah, they won't talk to you at all. And I'm like, sounds amazing. They're all the ones so far have been like, it's terrible. I'm like, no, I doubt it.
no, we like text, like
Yeah.
in house.
Yeah.
I like that. No small talk, just straight to the point.
Yeah.
We just cut to the chase, you all. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that is something that I've been very mindful about, learning from previous experiences. I'm not calling them mistakes, right? But previous experiences.
Right.
So that, so that I know what is important for me to be able to maintain not only, a healthy relationship for myself, but also for my kids, and the house and that, we share together, and setting the example for them as well. And so, yeah, I think talking about the relationship because you all, the other thing I think about postpartum is like, we're always postpartum. Once you have
Mhm.
a kid, right. Like it's kind of just like a different phases of it. So, I mean, I'm sure there's like some technical definition of like, it's actually like 18.5 months or whatever, but it's, I feel like
It doesn't like
it
end.
continues.
Yeah.
Oh
Yes.
yeah, I definitely
I feel
think
that all the
postpartum is
time.
forever. I like to use the term early postpartum for what people like traditionally call postpartum.
Mhm.
Uh,
Mhm.
And that I like that's how I make my distinction. Like, no, we're still early postpartum, but then we're gonna continue to be postpartum always. Like you still had a human grow inside your body. So that's not gonna change.
As far
Exactly.
as you giving birth in Egypt, I just had a couple questions. So one
Yeah.
is, did they have like a 6 week follow-up for you after you had the your
I
baby?
did. I had follow-ups, yeah, particularly after the emergency C-section, that because they just wanted to make sure like the stitches were okay and there wasn't any, that was brutal, you all. Oh my God. Again, nobody was telling me anything. So they're
That's
like,
what I wanted to know. Like, were they asking you about like your mental health or asking you about anything? And if there's something
"Mhm."
you didn't understand, like, did they provide translators for you? Like, there's so many,
So
like,
the great thing about the, Egyptian medical system is like it's English based. So
okay,
it's
great.
dual language for the most part. And so, I had, English speaking doctors. And so that was really helpful, obviously.
Right, right.
And my husband was like dual language too. So
Oh, cool.
so if I needed that, there he was definitely there. But no real questions about mental health, or even like other than how I'm like physically feeling, but or how I'm like healing, right? Or how the kids are doing. So, it's not like, about how it feels to be a mother.
Yeah.
No conversations about that.
Yeah.
Nothing.
Wonderful.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
Gosh, it's crazy. Yeah, I just had a couple questions. I didn't know how it felt too.
Yeah. It's so wild. It's so interesting. And like even the medical interventions, I'm always like so curious to hear what the like medical standard was, 15, 20 years ago, as
Hmm.
opposed to like all the people that we're talking to now. But yeah, the
We mentioned
emergency,
to somebody, I
it's
think,
rough.
who had an older child, we were like, yeah, when you leave the hospital, they give you a questionnaire to see how you feel. And she was like so shocked that we had that before we left the
Yeah.
hospital.
Yeah. Nope.
Was
You don't
Then
need
they
it.
do
that the
Just
new
anything with
thing?
goodbye.
them? Yeah, did they
Yeah.
do anything with it though? They're like, as you're walking out the door, it's like, here's your questionnaire. Like, go,
Yeah.
See you at your 6 week appointment.
right?
Yeah. Well, I had one during so my second birth, I I, they had to put the IV in me 4 different times. The first the first one, the nurse couldn't get it in, and they had to get a different nurse to put the original one in. And then while something I had to get antibiotics and it was burning when it was going in. So they gave me an ice pack to put on it, which I was like, does that really help? But it actually did. But I lifted the ice pack up one time to check it and my whole forearm was swollen. So all the fluid was going into like the subcutaneous space. And I was like, that's not right, you guys. Like, that's not right. Right. So I'm like, nurse. So they took it out. And by this time, the same nurse who couldn't get it in the first time was back on rotation, and
Of course.
she tried. Bless her, she was so nice because she tried and she couldn't get it. And so she said, "Do you want someone else?" And I said, "Yeah, please. Can we go get the other nurse who I know is with you?" And they got it back in. But I tell this whole long story because my forearms were bruised from
Yeah.
like you could see one of my veins was like black. It looked like it looked like a letter Y because there was like so much deep bruising. So I go back to my follow up. I had a second degree tear and I had stitches and they started burning when I was peeing. So I went back at like 4 weeks to have them checked. And the doctor, I'm like laying on the table, he's checking my stitches and he looks up and he sees my forearms and he asks me if I'm like safe at home. But my husband and the baby were with me in the room. And I
Oh,
remember thinking like, what a terrible
If
time to
I
ask
wasn't
me.
safe, yeah, like great. The perpetrator's right there.
Yeah. Nah, he's fucking me up at home.
oh,
Like,
yeah.
Can't wait to
you
go
know?
back home for more.
Yeah. Then I got nowhere to go and can't really walk. So like,
Great time to ask,
Thanks for
buddy.
asking. Yeah.
yeah.
Oh,
I'm
Check
glad
it
you
off
thought
your
of
list
that
that you
though.
asked me.
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I do think it's getting better on the mental health front at least. But I just feel like we get forgotten. We get forgotten. And I think a lot of us are conditioned in our upbringing to only address things that other people are addressing.
Mhm.
So if
Like
no one
nobody
else
else
is
knows.
saying, "Hey, Sarah, are you struggling? It looks like you maybe need some support." It's like not okay for you to say, "Hi, I'm struggling. I need some support."
Right.
And that's why I think these conversations are important because you feel so lonely. Like you said, you don't know that other people are having the same feelings. The not connecting to the baby thing was really tough for me because I just expected that I would. I
Yeah.
expected to have this immediate bond and I didn't. And I just felt like, what's wrong? I felt like this thing felt so right to me and now it's happening and everything feels wrong. And I don't understand, like, I don't know how to reconcile that.
I think we're taught that. I think people are like, oh, it's like this utopic like feeling, like, oh my gosh, I felt connected. It was amazing. And when I had my son, I was like, I don't feel anything. Like that's when I thought something was wrong with me. And that's why it's
Right.
conversations have to happen. So it's actually more common and that takes time to build that bond. But nobody talks to us like that.
Yeah, and how much of that is just like the social narrative or the cultural narrative around how it should feel,
Yeah.
Right.
It
to
should.
be a mother,
Good,
right?
yeah.
Like, no, we can feel all of the things, and that's 100% legitimate. Everything that you're feeling is 100% valid.
Yeah.
It's a complexity of emotions, and it's a continuum, right? It evolves and it changes and it morphs from sometimes second to second, right? Or minute to minute, or sometimes simultaneously. And it's beautiful and exhausting.
Yeah, it's
We
definitely
shouldn't
exhausting.
pigeonhole
100%.
anybody into how they should be feeling.
I always tell people the way I describe parenthood is really funny to me because parents get it and people who don't have children think it sounds really harsh, but being a parent is relentless. It's just it's never ending. It's constant. When they're young, they need your help for everything, and then like as that eases up, their problems start to become more complex because they're becoming more themselves. They're dealing with new social challenges or new whatever, and now it's not like I'm trying to reconcile you two fighting over a toy, but I'm trying to reconcile some like bullying thing at school or something that's very complex. So it's like, oh man, I thought I was out of one, and now I got to go into the other. I don't have older children, but this is what I picture happening, and I'm just exhausted thinking about it.
Well,
You're
that's what you were
exactly
saying, right? The postpartum continues and never ends.
Yeah. Yeah, you're exactly right. They always say it gets easier when they're younger, and it gets easier as they get older. I wouldn't say it's easier. It's different.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not worried about like, eating your veggies. I'm worried about like your financial future.
Right. Yeah. Do you have good
Oh
credit?
God, I gotta get to that too.
Do you know how to manage your bank account? Clearly, no. I mean, clearly
They're like,
no.
what's a check?
Yes.
How do I sign with my
Check
signature?
what?
We don't learn cursive anymore.
Yeah.
I can't read this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, Sarah. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We had a really great time talking, and I'm so glad that we could find a time to all come together and really talk about postpartum and how it feels to be a mother.
Yes, thank you so much for the opportunity. It's been great.
Thank you for listening to Postpartum Unfiltered.
If you enjoyed the show, please like, share, comment, or leave a review.
You can follow us on Instagram at postpartum.unfiltered.
If you feel called to share your postpartum experience, please contact us on Instagram or at drjilliancampbell.com.